Okay, so hi everybody. I think that we are now missing one person again. Okay, I start. Okay, yes. Okay, so hi everybody, good afternoon. I think we are all still moved by the previous presentation. So I'm Alessio Ponzio, and I teach modern European history and history of gender and sexuality at the University of Saskatchewan in theory. And I'm also teaching the history of homosexuality course in the Università di Torino that is beginning next week. And we're here today for the panel number 14. The title is Media and Rights. And so I am going to probably read, I think it's better if I just read the bio just before the presenters so that we don't forget, but we're going to keep the question at the very end. So, okay, second, the bios. Okay, so the first presenter is Matteo Winkler. He's an associate professor of human rights law and the academic director of CEMS at Aix Paris. He's a leading scholar on the rights of LGBTQ+ people, having published extensively on these matters in Italian, English, and French. Among his most recent publications are Queering the Laws of War, 2024, Diversity and Inclusiveness in International Arbitration, published in 2023, and of Athletes, Bodies, and Rules, Making Sense of Castor Semenya, published in 2022. And in 2019, the French organization L'Autre Cercle, I don't speak French, acknowledged Matteo as a role model for LGBT+ and allies in France. At Aix, he co-chairs the school's diversity committee and is going to present today a paper with title One Day This Kid, Gay Propaganda Laws and the Erasure of Queer Children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Alessio. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you, Charlotte. Thank you, Silvia, for organizing this. My presentation will be about the role of the position of queer children in international human rights law and in international human rights discourse. My argument is that so far queer children, I use the plural because only the plural can account for the immense diversity that exists in the queerness of children, although the law uses the category of child, the rights of the child, it's always singular. So I was saying that the position of queer children in international human rights discourse has always been marginal. It has always been really queer, in a queer position so far. I will not propose solutions on how take the queer children and put them at the center, but I want to criticize the way queer children are kept currently outside, at the periphery of international human rights law. And I take this image by David Wojnarowski, who is an artist who died very young from HIV complications in New York. And he wrote this, I don't know how to describe it in technical terms, an artwork with his face, his kid, his children, a picture of him as a child at the age of 8 at the center. And the title is One Day This Kid. And if you read it, I mean, I don't want to read it until the end because it's very long, but you really see the experience of queer children there. And I want you to focus on some sentences. One day, this kid will find something in his mind and body and soul that makes him hungry. One day, this kid will do something that causes men who wear the uniforms of priests and rabbis, men who inhabit certain stone buildings, to call for his death. One day, politicians will enact legislation against this kid. One day, families will give false information to their children, and each child will pass that information down generationally to their families, and that information will be designed to make existence intolerable for this kid. And at the end, I think that the last sentence is very meaningful. All these will begin to happen in 1 or 2 years when this kid discovers he desires to place his naked body on the naked body of another boy. And this very powerful message inspired me for my presentation, because I think that when Wojnarowski says that one day politicians will enact legislation against this kid, that's exactly the legal framework we are talking about. And in particular, done? Yes? We are talking about gay propaganda law, which are called in different names, sometimes anti-gay propaganda law, anti-LGBTIQPA. If you look at Ghana law, for example, the law that was enacted in the Ghana last year, you find this acronym that I didn't even know the letters they put in. And so they really curb the possibility for the existence of the queer children. If Sedgwick Kozowski is looking at us from there, making, like the French say, elle fait coucou, because Sedgwick found a way to look at these laws from a medical standpoint. So in an article which is titled How to Grow Your Kid Up Gay, which was published in 1991, she argued that immediately after the depathologization or declassification of homosexuality by the American Psychiatric Association in 1973, after really a few years after that, the medical authorities came back with another diagnosis, which is gender identity disorder in children. And that was, and Sedgwick said, this is a sort of backlash, that because you find some space of liberty for queer adults, you need to hit queer children in return for the liberty you have recognized. In this sort of conservative turn or backlash, this is a very interesting interpretation for what the gay propaganda laws are. And in fact, in 1981, you might remember, and the Council of Europe decriminalized or recommended states to decriminalize homosexuality in all member states. And at the same time, in 1987, the UK, Margaret Thatcher's government, enacted the infamous Section 28, which prohibited promoting homosexuality in schools and depicting homosexuality as a decent way of family and the way of living. And that was the way the Thatcher's government hit the queer children in return for some liberty that have been recognized to queer adults. Immediately after the fall of the communist, a few years after the fall of the communist regime in Romania, the legislators was under enormous pressure to decriminalize homosexuality, which they did, but at the same time they introduced a new norm saying that it is a criminal offense, which was punished with a few years in jail, the fact of inciting, making propaganda, association, and proselytism of the practice of same-sex sexual relations. So it seems like, you decriminalize same-sex intimacies and you make them private because, the main argument about decriminalization was that it was protected by right to private life and privacy, and at the same time you want to relegate it to the private sphere. You don't want that to become public, and so you put an obstacle by saying no promotion of homosexuality in public. Same Russia. Russia is perhaps the most famous, the famous promotion of non-traditional sexual relationships among minors, and it's here that the minors come back very significantly in the picture, in the legal picture. In Lithuania, in 2009, legislator amended a law on communication and advertising in case of minors involved by saying that any information in contempt of family values is harmful, automatically harmful for children. And so there should not be any communication of that kind. And in 2011, we might remember that the Human Rights Council of the UN published the first report on sexual orientation, gender identity-based discrimination and violence, where they really tackled the idea of decriminalization, but also here the position of queer children is quite marginal. In 2021, you might remember the new law by Viktor Orban, who introduced a Child Protection Act that prohibits any image depicting homosexuality, transgender realities in the media. And then, unfortunately, last week, the Constitutional Court of Uganda basically refused to invalidate the Anti-Homosexuality Act, which is the harshest law ever, anti-queer law ever promoted in history. And this law contained the notion of promotion of homosexuality. In fact, I've reported some text of the Russian federal law, of the Hungarian law, and the Ugandan law, and you can see that, for example, the promotion of non-traditional sexual relationships among minors expressed in the dissemination of information aimed at creating in minors a non-traditional sexual orientation, promoting the attractiveness of non-traditional sexual relationships, creating a distorted image of the social equivalence of traditional and non-traditional sexual relationships. This is anti-queer dynamics at the worst, the most concrete examples, right? In the Hungarian law, for example, it is the media, the information that depicts or propagates divergence from self-identity corresponding to sex at birth, clearly an anti-trans stance. Sex change or homosexuality is equated to pornography and pedophilia. So that's how the law is crafted. This law is currently challenged before the European Court of Justice. And then the Anti-Homosexuality Act, which is very complex. I won't indulge with it, but there is a section on child grooming, which says that if you display, distribute, or supply to a child any material depicting or illustrating a sexual act between persons of the same sex or any other conduct, so because the law is very broad, can be anything, basically, right? Also, if you go to a child, if you have a child in the room and say in a conference, for example, and you say being homosexual is good, jail. I don't remember which is the sanction, but I think it's like kind of, I don't know, imprisonment for up to 20 years. Okay. So, now a little test for you. Who is this guy? Aristotle. So Aristotle said, so in this slide I will summarize where this narrative comes from. I tried to do some research, and the fact of wanting to limit the possibility of having queer children in the picture comes back to antiquity, to Aristotle, who said that basically he said that same-sex relations were considered unnatural proclivities, and these unnatural proclivities derived from a trauma that a person had been victim when he was young. A trauma, basically a rape or a sexual abuse, right? So this idea that if you are homosexual, that's because there was some deviation or unnatural things that happened to you when you were a kid, that is really from ancient times. Second person. Yes, Charles Darwin. So Darwin imagined a world where we all progress towards, a better world. And of course, the evolution of people, if you put it in a micro scheme, it's a person. Person grows up, right? And the metaphor that Charles Darwin used is the evolution of person without any deviation. So heterosexuality was actually, there are some queer analyses of Darwin's The Descent of a Man, and this really speaks about the fact that progress is progress towards heterosexuality and nothing else. Anything else is a deviation. Cesare Lombroso, interestingly, divided homosexual criminals in criminals and occasional ones. For criminals, he said that they should be confined from their youth, for they are a source of contagion and cause a great number of occasional criminals. So this idea not only of the queer children to be erased, but also the fact that they must be isolated so that they do not expand their proclivities to other people. So also the idea of contagion is very much present. And eventually Sigmund Freud. In particular, Freud sometimes is used as a very gay-friendly person, where he typically consoled an American mother in this letter from 1935 that said homosexuality is just a variation of sexual function, but it is a variation produced by a certain arrest of sexual development, right? So the idea that the person does develop naturally as an heterosexual and deviates from that, becoming a queer child. And the case, I mean, I have only 5 minutes left, but I want to summarize a case from last year, Makate versus Lithuania, where this Lithuanian law was used against this author, Neringa Makate. She's not alive now. She died in 2020, but she wrote a book with a lot of children fairy tales, including 2 where there were two same-sex couples, basically princess and a princess, and the prince and the prince, basically. And the government decided to put a tag on the book like forbidden for kids of under 14 of age. And she claimed in court that this tag prohibited her from exercising freedom of expression. I won't indulge with the definition, primitive. This is a primitive and biased propaganda of homosexuality, obviously. But in the case, which is most important for my argument, is that the court does not talk at all about the queer child, the queer children. It says, for example, that there is no scientific evidence or sociological data suggesting that the mere mention of homosexuality or open public debate about sexual minority social status would adversely affect children. But what if it does, right? What if really looking at the variation of sexuality that exists in the world make a child gay or queer? Would that be so bad? So it's a typical normative, heteronormative position here. And then other cases, always against Russia, where they say that minors are exposed to diversity. This is good for social cohesion. The only reference in this court judgment, which we might want to rewrite in the Queer Judgment Project, and Marika, I've already committed you on that. It's when third parties bring this to the attention of the court. The court doesn't care unless someone tells them. So in conclusion, my idea is not so much to use queer theory because I look at the rights that are already written in a convention on the rights of the child, which was written by adults to regulate the rights of children. In this convention, we already find some human rights that we can use to protect children, even if my idea is to move from a system where children are protected to a system where children are recognized agency, and so there are rights of children and not simply children being protected by the state. And these rights, for example, right to access information, for example, on safe and respectful social and sexual behavior, right to education, right to privacy, which is super important, right to be free from all forms of physical and mental abuse, etc., and the right to free speech, to receive information. Some restrictions are allowed to protect morals. This is a classic exception under human rights law. However, the case law and on this point has been very clear that morals does not mean a single moral view that is governmentally imposed, but must also take into consideration the diversity of the morals that exist in a certain society. So thank you very much. I leave it here, and if there are questions, I will be happy to respond later. Thank you.
Thank you, Matteo, for being on time. So I'm going to check so that we know that we're going to be able to have a conversation. So the next presenter is Lucia Cucchi. She's a graduate student of the University of Milan at NASP Graduate School. She graduated in Politics, Philosophy, and Public Affairs in 2022 with a thesis on sex education within democratic frameworks. Her current work focuses on feminist education and the rethinking of educational responsibility from multiple to collective in a liberal pluralistic framework. Her main interests concern feminist and queer theory, critical pedagogies, and liberal paternalism. And the presentation today is entitled Politics of Parenthood, Unraveling Far-Right Narratives on Same-Sex Families in Contemporary Italy. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes? Thank you very much, and thank you for accepting me here. I'm a bit emotional as it's my first ever conference, but I'm really glad to be here. It's a very friendly environment, so the best place to start, in my opinion. So today I'm going to present this paper, which I co-authored with Francesca Miccoli, a postdoc now at the University of Basel. She cannot be here, unfortunately, today because she's in Switzerland, so I'll present for the both of us. So starting. So since the beginning of the Meloni government in September 2022, motherhood, procreation, and the family re-entered the governmental discourse. And Meloni talks at length about motherhood, but not as often about parenthood, of course, and the importance of shifting the current tragic demographic trends towards through the increase of natality rates. According to her, more positive representations of the nuclear family in the media, together with governmental measures to increase families' welfare and addressing work-life balance, could work in shifting the trend. However, we have heard many of her discourses by now, and ranging from the viral discourse at the Italian Pride at the right-wing rally in 2019. So I'm Georgia, I'm a woman, I'm a mother, I'm Catholic, which has been remixed several times, and which, to be honest, I have listened to while writing this paper. It's been a wonderful experience. From then the other speech at the Vox rally in June 2022, in which she said yes to the natural family, no to the LGBTQ plus lobby, yes to the sexual identity, whatever that means, and no to gender ideology. And then with their more institutionalized role, we know that political communication shifts very much in non-institutional or pre-institutionalized communication, and then with the institutional roles. At the Demographic Summit in Budapest just last year, she claimed that it's a great battle for somebody who's defending humankind and the rights of people to also defend families, defend nations, to also defend identities. It's also to defend God and all the things that have built our civilization. So that's what we're working with, apparently. So she claimed that Italy's policies at the same summit will have from now on the family always in mind, which family we will discuss it, with the intention of recentering family importance in the public discourse and encouraging women's work-life balance. So at first sight, these might seem reasonable and, from some point of view, even feminist standpoints. However, the measures, as we know, are so uninfluential that they can be considered mostly propaganda, and her political agenda openly opposes LGBTQ rights and parental rights together with immigrants' rights. So that's very at odds with a declared pronatality interest. What we have tried to point out was the incoherence between defending family values on one hand, so within the Italian identity and Catholic culture, versus the goal of increasing natality trends. So how could she combine the two of them? So we tried to address the literature gap concerning gender and queer issues in relation to populist far-right parties on one hand, and the relationship between nationalistic government and reproductive racism, which is treated at length in other papers, but and which we of course have considered. We tried to unmask the incoherence between pronatality governmental concerns and the systematic exclusion of LGBTQ plus families from the national family narrative. And we wanted also to show that natality claims follow a strictly repronormative ideal, in the words of Weissman. And also we want to show that the only accepted family ideal consists still in the one of the nuclear heterosexual family, as appears in the words of Feynman and Peterson. So, in continuity with the approach adopted across Europe by right-wing populist parties, Fratelli d'Italia, which is the party headed by Meloni, has explicitly antagonized public and political attempts to enlarge conceptions of family and motherhood at the legal level, even before their government, as we know. So some of the examples are here on the slide. At first, they're openly against gender ideology, still a fuzzy term, and they have done that with opposing to the Zan bill in 2021. They're openly against surrogacy, as we will see later on, and they have proposed to make surrogacy as a universal crime, which is now being rediscussed again, as it has been reproposed just last year. And also, they claim that same-sex unions and parenthood are some kind of suboptimal parenthood and unions compared to heterosexual ones. And this is it can be seen in the opposition to stepchild adoption in the Siena bill, which aimed at regulating civil unions in 2016. So, considering this, the legal side seems still the legal and legislative side seems still the privileged one for recognizing queer parenthood, and it's still a site of contention, of deep contention. As you might know, Italy has two main means of recognizing children in queer family formations. So one is stepchild adoption, which follows the procedure of Law 40 of 2004. And it has a section of adoption under particular circumstances for which a person can adopt their partner's biological child. And then there is a certificates transcription, for which birth certificates obtained abroad can be transcribed directly in municipal registers by mayors. But this practice, unfortunately, has been declared illegal by the Piantedosi Circular of January 2023. So now there are being legal battles on that. We chose to focus on stepchild adoption because it contains more layered discourse, on one hand on the political side, but also on the legal motivations why to make a certain couple, legally entitled, yes, that's the term, to adopt a child. So stepchild adoption has gained relevance in the Italian political debate in its association with queerness during the discussion of the Siena bill, which was directed at regulating civil unions, and in the parliamentary debate, stepchild adoption was then eliminated in order to make the law approvable for two main reasons. It was claimed at first that allowing queer individuals to access stepchild adoption would equate civil unions to heterosexual marriage, which would have been a violation of the primacy of the heterosexual nuclear family, which is also at the basis of Italian society according to the Constitution. And secondly, it would have been supposedly the beginning of a season of wild surrogacy practices. So the liberalization of wild surrogacy practices. Yeah, it's real. It seems unreal, but it's real. It's there. So on the legal side, instead, as I mentioned, courts are the privileged side where queer family formation can be recognized and find legitimation. So juridical narratives have in several occasions been more progressive than political ones and seem to have truly taken into consideration the child's best interest, even if not always, of course. And also if there's little more to be more progressive than this government, but still. At the same time, even in courts, there are some efforts of the LGBTQ community that have been undertaken to assert their visibility and demand recognition, and in society as parents, that still often encounter resistance in the form of devaluation and dismissal of non-heterosexist forms of family, parenthood, and motherhood. So even when LGBTQ couples fulfill their reproductive aim, let's say, biological aim, they're still deemed less than heterosexual families. In light of this framework, then we move to consider which narratives could be hidden behind the political narratives employed by the current government to antagonize stepchild adoption and queer family formations, and claiming that unmasking them could show that the real concern was never natality, but rather the perpetration of a specific family ideal. So we identified a broader overarching narrative, which is the threat to society's stability, which is the idea that the legal recognition of queer families, for example, through same-sex marriage, would amount to the destruction of society as it is. And this holds also true for the possibility of same-sex parenthood through IVF or surrogacy, and it is also related to the fear of the deconstruction of the traditional nuclear family, for example, related to themes such as divorce or single parenting. Then we identified three sub-narratives. The first one is this one, the homocolonization narrative. We invented the name, so there's nothing in the literature, I think. But if there is, please let me know, because it's that we don't know it. And it's very much linked to what you were presenting before. So the fear that children growing up in queer families will be more critical towards heteronormative stances and a heteronormative sexual order, and will not adapt to the current political narrative. So it will be more difficult to enforce heterosexist political narratives and policies. And this is linked on one hand, on legal side, to the necessity of non-homosexual education, which we found in a sentence, in a ruling by the Tribunal of Venice in 2017, which was very weird to read, but it's there, it's official. And it reminds on one hand of the fear of the queer child, theorized by Roski just 10 years ago. And the idea also that heterosexual socialization is the normal one, so it's a necessary one, and so it's best to expose children also, at least also, to heterosexual socialization. And also it appears in a debate that Meloni had against his opponent of the Democratic Party just before elections in 2022, in which he claimed that a mother and a father are the best option a child could have, and not same-sex parents. So in the end, queer couples are depicted as inept to child rearing because they're too subversive. The second one still is what we call the technocrat feminist narrative. And it is the idea that recognizing stepchild adoption still would create a snowball effect, leading to a dystopia where everyone would recur to ART, so assisted reproductive technologies. And on this narrative, we had a bit of difficulty because Meloni never mentioned it explicitly, but we have found that in her speeches, there can be found a heterosexist narrative which links womanhood, motherhood, and the family. And this kind of triad acts automatically. So womanhood implies a built-in biological desire for motherhood, and this desire can be fulfilled only in heterosexual desire through the sexual family. And for example, so the lesbian use of ARTs, for example, is not even discursively contemplated by Meloni, so it breaks the link between womanhood, motherhood, and family. So for Meloni, it seems impossible to think even of in the first place, of a lesbian woman, in her discourses at least, but of a lesbian mother, it seems like a further step that it never appears. And in this case, we thought that maybe silence was in some sort of way louder than words, so this absence was interesting. And so we claim that stepchild adoption is in some sort of way encouraging chosen parenthood and reproduction and acts in contrast with the government pro-life politics. Third and last one, sub-narrative, on which we have still a bit of work to do, and so still suggestions are very welcome. It's employed especially against surrogacy, so the idea that women's reproductive power would be exploited by evil gay men. And this is backed also by the law proposal to make surrogacy a universal crime, as I mentioned in 2018, but also re-proposed now. And it appears as well in Meloni's discourses, also pre-electoral and then now, in which she defines surrogacy as the slavery of the third millennium, and she refers to surrogacy as something that makes children bargaining goods to fulfill biological reproduction, so just a egoistic desire, and also the fact that altruistic motherhood, which appears in surrogacy narratives, hides most of the times economic exploitation. So in this sense, we found that surrogacy threatens the existence of motherhood, making it just a transaction, and mothers disappear as they cannot fulfill their caring role. Thank you. Ooh. Oh no. Okay, so in the end, I'm really on time. Nice. Against those narratives, we have tried to contend that welcoming forms of kinship and reclaiming the plurality of accounts of parenting and family formation could better serve the pronatality governmental claims and aims, and that, however, we still have to consider that the fact that those forms are excluded from public discourse draws a clear picture about what are the nationally accepted boundaries of family relationships. And in the end, we hope that associations, actions, civil society, and legal battles will progressively contribute to shifting these entrenched ideas. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lucia. And now we have Anna Gorini. So Anna Gorini graduated in 2022 with a PhD in contemporary literature from the University of Foreigners here in Siena. She holds a master's degree in classical studies from the University of Milan, and her MA thesis was on the language of Euripides. And in 2023 she published the book Una straordinaria antipatica, Oriana Fallaci, giornalista e scrittrice, with Carocci. And in this monograph, she analyzes in particular the issue of abortion in Italy in the 70s, exploring the intersection between journalistic discourse and the novel Letter to a Child Never Born. Gorini is a journalist and independent scholar, and she has participated in national and international conferences. And the title of her presentation today is New Forms of Kinship versus Traditional Organization of the Family in Journalistic Storytelling. Thank you.
Okay. First of all, thank you to all the organizers and who included me in this huge conference, which I found very interesting and amazing. And so I'm basically a journalist, even though I studied literature. And so I try to explain what is going on from the journalistic point of view. So from the point of view that readers can get reading newspapers. In my presentation, I will focus on the topic of queer kinship in the public discourse in Italy. To do this, I have chosen to attempt an analysis through text from mainstream press, that is, those media that inform on all areas of public discourse without proposing specialized insights. It is not possible to say that this approach offers perspective capable of exhausting all the nuances of discourse on a topic. Nonetheless, I believe that it offers a significant paradigmatic synthesis of a set of symbolic representations and their evolutions through the identification of expressive forms, languages, and communicative habits. Certainly, the analysis of mainstream press both expresses in other words, my objective is to derive observations regarding a global trend. I consider the year 2019-2023, pre- and post-pandemic, an adequate and significant time frame in which a change and subsequent stabilization occurred. The pandemic has indeed determined a threshold, especially in the realm of human relationship. It has introduced new needs for coexistence during periods of enforced confinement. It has disaggregated and reaggregated various human communities and ultimately disintegrated social habits, reducing the collective dimension to make room for the individual one. Alongside all this, the virtualization of many spaces supported by communication technologies has rapidly changed the dynamics of collective situations previously perceived as traditional, which were considered solid, such as school, work, or family. Reconstructing a slightly broader chronological scenario, we must remember that 2016 was the year in which the law in Italy on regulation of civil unions between persons of same sex came into force, while on November 4th, 2020, the proposal for the law promoted by Member of Parliament Zan regarding the persecution against violence or discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity was approved by the Parliament. But as we know, this proposal was rejected in the Senate and therefore remained blocked there. The first step of my work was to find a possible translation of queer kinship in an Italian linguistic and cultural environment in the context of journalistic discourse. Actually, if we take, for example, the definition of queer from Treccani online dictionary, we find rather lacking sociological, cultural, and philosophical sense of the term, because it says that queer means homosexual or extensively strange. Instead, we analyze the lemma, if instead we analyze the lemma on the Treccani online encyclopedia, we obtain a certainly more in-depth handling in which it is also explained that in any case, its meaning is not widely known. Therefore, to establish a method to analyze period that produced a mass of articles published by the press, it was necessary to act simultaneously on two fronts: the global reading among the major national generalist newspapers and the analysis of occurrences through the identification of some key search terms to set up a type of monitoring both quantitative and qualitative. For reasons also related to the archive structure and search possibility within this, I restricted this type of monitoring to the edition corresponding to the printed layout of the Corriere della Sera, not the online edition. Moreover, as we will see later, this newspaper in Italy has had a particular role in spreading the phrase queer family. In this way, the monitoring choice was with respect to the term queer and famiglia, and the phrases queer family and famiglia arcobaleno. Famiglia is indeed a term that could best intercept the sense of kinship, as phrases with unione, parentela, comunità, queer are not frequent in journalistic language. Thus, by searching only the term famiglia, it is evident that this recalls a very present topics. You can find it more than 4,000 times each year, and in 2023 it occurred more than 5,000 times. The family is a protagonist regarding numerous themes, but essentially emerges in four main ways. In the economic field, where it is portrayed as an aggregation and center of financial and productive power, in the case of large entrepreneurial families, as a subject of political power, especially in the case of large royal families, as a social subject, and in the years under consideration, it is narrated through the burdens, difficulties, and increasingly serious situation it must face, including violence. Finally, a module of social organization as a module of social organization, it participates to dialogue with politics, which considers it in its capacity as a civic and economic subject and stakeholder of specific interest. In this sense, it is also depicted as an evolving social body. From a quantitative perspective, we discovered that the term queer appears 12 times in 2019, 7 times in 2020, 19 times in 2021, 12 times in 2022, and whopping 33 times in 2023. If we search for the phrase famiglia arcobaleno referring to the same-sex parent families, essentially families with children, there are 19 occurrences in 2019, 15 in 2020, 17 in 2021, 23 in 2022, and 19 results in 2023. The phrase queer family appears in 20 times in 2023, and it is the first time it appears, but we will see more later. From these premises, I will try to synthesize the discourse on the family and on queer. It is read in the pages from 29 to 2019 to 2023. An event that moves the world of politics and that generates a lot of discussion in public opinion is the 13th World Congress of Families held in Verona from March 29 to 31. The Congress is promoted by a conservative association founded in the United States in 1997 and, quote, promote Christian values, and it is based on the voluntary union of men and women in the perpetual bond of marriage, end quote. Even before the gathering take place, the government is divided, the right-wing parties align with the ideas for which the Congress is organized, and feminist movements and LGBTQ community take to the streets for counter-demonstration. Corriere della Sera publishes various interventions in the day leading up to the Congress. Emma Bonino, historical radical, together with Silvia Manzi, highlights the relationship between the restoration in defense of the traditional family and anti-Europeanism. At this point, you can see the article. At this point, with the journalistic objective of equidistance, Corriere della Sera supports a public debate and a subsequent debate among politicians, commissioning an opinion poll by Nando Pagnoncelli, popular also on television, which is published on March 23. It is worth pausing on the titling. The title says, "Family also includes gay couples." 44% say yes, 47% against. Summary: for 22% of Italians, only marriage between a man and a woman matters. There is an assertion, immediately followed by a denial, and then a clarification with an effect of balancing everything out. In the text, however, Pagnoncelli highlights how the relative majority believes that a family is formed by individuals of different sexes and as well as individuals of the same sex. On March 25, 2019, a complex analysis aimed at holding together all positions is that of Mauro Magatti, sociologist at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan, who, in a piece published in the comments sections, observes the fact of the impressive mutations of the family which have occurred over a couple of generations, but asks whether the new model of the family itself is not simply functional to the technocentric society. Above all, he says that the family cannot be imposed by law. It must earn its consent on the field. On April 2, Dacia Maraini, after the Verona gathering, published a commentary. The writer further states that the family is a historical creation like other institutions, and the great strength to change according to the great changes of the time. Refusing real changes is pure reactionary ideology. It is worth noting that once again the comment is published without the graphic apparatus that attracts a reader. However, it is understood that the newspaper line is expressed in such comments. Openness, certainly, between moderation and progressiveness. In the following period, there are heinous abuses of children within families, and talk concentrates on the crisis of parenthood and family as central axis of the society. On June 30, at the end of the month, faced with the gigantic gay pride demonstration held in Milan, Corriere della Sera offers a reportage that tends to be neutral and aims to record the great and varied participation, as well as the emerging message from one of the chanted slogans: "Marriage for all is already in 15 countries of the European Union." The impression is that the sense of the article is to record a situation of fact, of an evolution that society has already undergone. But what are the explicit references to the concept of queer in 2019? Regarding the term queer, of the 12 times it is used in the year, especially as a term defining an extravagant aesthetic or as a term referring to homosexuality, there are 3 cases where it appears in its deep descriptive value of broad phenomenon within interrelated reflections with the feminine word and conveyed by women and feminist languages in a broad sense. An exploration of the meaning of queer is proposed in page inspired and dedicated to women, as if female readers were more willing and open to talk about new topics, especially in a high register of cultural confrontation. On April 17, in preparation for the week of events Il Tempo delle Donne, Women's Time, held in September, promoted by the newspaper, for the opening of a vast investigation on the theme of bodies, Paul Preciado is interviewed, presented as, quote, philosopher and professor of political history of the body and gender theory at the University of Paris III, who, with his transition from Beatrix to Paolo Beatrix, has become a reference point for queer and biopolitics. End quote. The female, so I will not be able to conclude my paper. Anyway, what I would like to point out is that during these years you can realize that there is a sort of development of the attitude within the newspaper, and so you come from a situation where these the terms queer or the topics about the queerness and arcobaleno families are treated more and more in a serious way, related to cultural themes and taking more deepness in the use of the newspapers. What I wanted to point out is the great interview of Michela Murgia, but from the newspaper point of view, because when in May, 6 May 2023, the journalist Aldo Cansullo interviews Michela Murgia. It's a special day. So let me find. Oh, here we are. So it's a really special day, not only because of this astonishing interview, but because of this kind of page. Because, let me find this. So the interview is launched on the front page, where a photograph of the writer is published centrally, saying she bought a house with 10 beds for her queer family. For the first time in the newspaper and generally in the Italian public media space, this expression appears. And the Observatory of the Italian Language Treccani at the end of 2023 indicates queer family, the neologism of the year, starting precisely from Murgia's interview. By chance, or perhaps due to a fine journalistic manipulation skill, the interview comes out on the day when the opening news worldwide is the official end of the pandemic, sanctioned by the World Health Organization, while in England, the new king is crowned after over 70 years of Queen Elizabeth's reign. And you can see that the crowning of the king is less important than the interview of Michela Murgia. Okay. So the layout seemed to say that in the language of journalistic graphic, that even though tradition persists, it is no longer so important. An old word dramatically ended with the pandemic that took away 20 million people, dividing them, marking deep grooves between bodies, but there is a new, different word, the result of a social change that the upheavals of the very last years have rapidly brought to light. Queer family not only testifies to the evolution of language, but it also the symbolic description of the social evolution that has taken place. And indeed, the definition of queer family given by Murgia is an atypical family nucleus in which relationships matter more than roles, an anthropological and affective universe opposed in the newspaper page to the royal family, a metaphor for form and power, colonialism and globalization. The comment column by Gramellini, so at the bottom, captures precisely this exhaustion of symbols, rituals, roles. The impact of the interview is enormous. All Italian media pick it up, and the concept of the queer family sparks discussion, and it is further elaborated on 2 pages in the Corriere 2 days later on May 8. Murgia's story, which ends on August 10, even before what was dramatically expected, thus changes a cultural perspective through the spread of a neologism that enters a language within a day. To remain in the word of media, the choice of La Stampa di Torino on May 12 is exemplary of this impact, as it introduces the diversity editor, a new figure in the Italian journalistic landscape to inform without discriminating. What is possible to conclude from this observation? That in Italian public discourse, the concept of queer kinship representing an alternative model of human relationships has gained recognition. The media has not only narrated this term and phenomenon, but has also documented its evolution within our society. The same journalist who in July 2021 characterized queer as an ideology originating from Anglo-Saxon campuses permeating the entertainment industry and cultural sphere, less than 2 years later, Aldo Cazzullo, through an interview, introduced a novel perspective into the Italian public discourse. And that's all. Sorry.